Hey everybody, we're going to get started here in just a minute. Give a few more minutes for folks to join. Okay, it looks like we got a lot of folks on the call, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Hi everyone, welcome to the Stellar Development Foundation quarterly call, where we're going to share more about how we capped off 2020. And I first want to thank you all for your understanding of the date time change for this event. And we're really excited that you could all join us today at this new time. Because there is a lot we want to cover about our accomplishments in Q4 and really the big takeaways from the year. So a little bit about what we're going to dive into today. Danelle Dixon, our CEO, is going to start us off in a moment with the highlights and the success of our 2020 strategy. She'll then dive in on the work we've done to foster sustainable use cases specifically on the Stellar network. And then we'll hear from Justin Rice, who's the SDF head of ecosystem. He's going to share the network stats coming out of Q4 and really the incredible growth we've seen there. Well, he'll also talk about our tech updates and the other ways we're ensuring the robustness and usability of Stellar. And then we're going to hear from Candace Kelly, SDF's general counsel. She's going to talk about what we've done to be the blockchain people know and trust. So how we've been growing our visibility and engagement from marketing and policy initiatives. And then we're going to wrap it back up with Danelle, who's going to give you an idea of kind of how these successes are from this year are going to inform our 2021 strategy and our vision. And then, of course, we're going to leave a little time at the end for questions. And as I mentioned in the invite, we'll be giving away up to 300 swag boxes to the first respondents to the webinar survey that will be available to you at the very end of this call. Okay, so with so much to share and no real time to spare, I'm going to hand the floor over to Danelle.
Well, thank you, Lauren. Welcome everybody to our 2020 Q4 in review. I'm really happy to be here with all of you today. The much awaited 2021 has begun. I actually can't believe we're 21 days into it. And while I think the world is in many ways breathing a big sigh of relief to see 2020 behind us, it was actually a landmark year for the team at the Stellar Development Foundation and a year of tremendous growth for the Stellar network. And I want to talk about both. So 2020 introduced unprecedented circumstances and dramatic changes to lives around the globe. The challenges created by the pandemic and the economic repercussions resulted in a moment of urgency that helped drive renewed focus on the opportunities blockchain offers from countries and companies alike. That opened the door to new discussions and new opportunities that SDF helped to point to Stellar. There are so many things I could point to, and we're going to cover a lot in this call, but just to highlight a few. The success we saw with the first year of the Enterprise Fund with investments totaling $9.265 million. We saw 2 core protocol upgrades. We updated community funds that better serve our stakeholders. We pivoted to the virtual world that saw us host almost 40 events, including webinars like these, plus participation in more than 20 industry conferences and events. And a growing SDF team to help accomplish much of this work. We're almost a third larger than we were at the start of the year, and now we span 10 countries. So this growing team has been guided by our strategic pillars. So our work this year our work in 2020 focused primarily around our 3 pillars. And I know we talk about these a lot, but I want to remind you what they are. So ensuring the robustness and usability of Stellar, being the blockchain people know and trust, and fostering sustainable use cases. These pillars helped us ensure that we were always working towards a larger strategy. Now, we adopted these in 2019, but we've used them to guide the work in 2020, and we've opted to stay with them again, just as a highlight for 2021. So I'd like to use the majority of our time together to talk about the work we accomplished on these 3 fronts. So first, let's take a look at fostering sustainable use cases. So when we talk about fostering sustainable use cases, we mean the products and services built on Stellar, they have to bring real world value to the end users of those products and services. So having products and services with inherent value, those that solve real problems for users, will ensure their long-term viability. So we want to help deliver those use cases and those services that have been thought out, demonstrate value to the end user, and use of the product and service, and can demonstrate a path to a viable business model. So one of the most important ways we do this is by supporting the Stellar Anchor Network. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I hope to be saying this all year too. We are lighting up the Stellar Network. And when I say we, I mean SDF in addition in working with our community and the ecosystem. So we're lighting up the Stellar map with Anchor services. We ended the year with 20 Anchor services compared to 12 at the close of 2019. Stellar powers each of these entities and so many more as they are solving the prevalent needs in their regional markets. Each of these entities from all parts of the world comprise the Stellar ecosystem and are part of the solution that we are collectively building as we seek to achieve a world in which where you live and what you have no longer prohibit you from participating in the financial system. It's actually super simple. Equitable access is not a privilege, it's a right. So something I think you'll hear us say more this year, the blockchain future isn't some distant reality, it's now, it's today, it's already happening. This map isn't about potential, it shows the achievements blockchain has already made, connecting global financial infrastructure. And that's what Stellar was created for and what SDF is set up to support. So this progress is achieved by fostering new products and new relationships. So expanding the Anchor map culminated in Q4, namely with the announcement of new stablecoins live or soon to be live on the network. We partnered with Center to bring USDC, one of the world's leading compliant and regulated digital dollar stablecoins, to the Stellar network. We're going to talk more about that this quarter as it gets set to go live here in Q1. In Q4, 2 other anchors issued new assets. Bitbond partnered with Bankhaus Vanderheit to issue a new Euro stablecoin. That's already being leveraged within and beyond the Stellar ecosystem, which is really cool. And Settle Network brought the 2 new live stablecoins, ARST, an Argentine peso stablecoin, and BRLT, a Brazilian real. We've also established new relationships, notably in Asia. ParaHub, a majority-owned subsidiary of the Union Bank of the Philippines, announced that they are joining the Stellar network, which will enable cash out to over 3,000 points of sale in the Philippines, one of the largest receiving markets for remittances. In parallel, Change, a digital cross-border payments business based in Singapore, is onboarding as an anchor and will serve as the sending partner for the Singapore-Philippines remittance corridor. So stay tuned over the next few weeks because we're going to hear more of these announcements. And as many of you likely saw a couple of weeks ago, SDF signed an MOU, that's a Memorandum of Understanding, with the Ukrainian Ministry of Digital Transformation to serve in an advisory capacity as they seek to develop a virtual asset strategy. We're so excited to help them think through the digital asset strategy for their country. This year, we really saw tremendous momentum for the use cases on Stellar that are connecting financial systems around the world. It's inspiring to see this progress, and I'm so excited for what Justin has to tell you about the network stats. And what's even more is that growth is translating to how we are seeing businesses and people use the network. The traction there is undeniable. So I'll turn it over to Justin to get into the network stats and our work to ensure Stellar is robust and usable. Justin?
Thanks, Danelle. So for those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Justin Rice, SDF's head of ecosystem. And this pillar of our 2020 strategy, ensure the robustness and usability of Stellar, is very near and dear to my heart. So when we talk about the robustness and usability of Stellar, here's what we mean. Stellar needs to be secure, user-friendly, and capable of scaling. It needs to be able to support all the businesses currently building on Stellar, but also to handle future use cases. So at SDF, we contribute to the robustness and usability of Stellar by stewarding the code and by supporting the ecosystem. And I'll mention a few of the Q4 achievements we're proud of in that regard. But as Danelle suggested, the evidence of the robustness and usability of Stellar, that really comes from all the activity in the ecosystem. So one simple way to think about it, are people using Stellar? I'm really excited to be here with you all today because the metrics I'm about to share indicate that the answer to that question is a resounding yes. Yes, people are using Stellar, and increasingly so. So I've been in the Stellar ecosystem for several years at this point, and I have to say, 2020 and specifically Q4 2020, they really blew me away. So let's dig into that a bit. At the start of this year, we picked a number of metrics that we wanted to use to track quarter-over-quarter growth, and we can take a look at those. The good news, based on every single one of those measures, every single one, the Stellar network grew in Q4. Total accounts increased by 3%. That means we ended the year with almost 4.8 million Stellar accounts. The total number of payments grew by 26%. That means there were over 15 million payments in Q4 compared to 12 million in Q3. The number of average daily operations also grew by 13%, and we'll take a closer look at that in a second. And the average daily volume on Stellar's decentralized exchange increased by almost 139%. That's a lot more asset conversion. The decentralization of the network is consistent with the rest of the year, which is great since, quick reminder, at this point, SDF could turn off all its validators and the network would keep on ticking. There was also a 6% increase in unique assets. There are now over 8,800 on the network. And that's because people in the ecosystem are busy building things and taking advantage of the fact that Stellar is designed to connect the world's assets on a single platform and to make asset issuance incredibly easy. So for those of you who have been attending these calls throughout the year, this slide should look pretty familiar. But what I'm about to show you now are a couple of other metrics we pulled for the end of the year that really speak volumes to Stellar's growth and maturity. One of the most notable indications of growth is the number of operations the network processed in 2020. So in April of 2020, Stellar hit the 1 billion mark. There were 1 billion total operations since the network began in 2015, which is great. But what's really remarkable is that in the second half of the year, the acceleration in network usage put Stellar on track to outpace that milestone annually. The network processed almost 430 million operations in Q3 and Q4 alone. 430 million. So if you look at the graph on the left, that shows the 12% increase in operations processed from Q3 to Q4. And the graph on the right shows the annual total, which represents a 142% increase. I also want to share a new indicator we started looking at this year and that we'll focus on in these reports from now on, and that's something we're calling relevant assets. So relevant assets. SDF defines a relevant asset as an asset that's tethered to a real financial instrument. So for example, NGNT, the Nigerian Naira stablecoin issued by Cowrie, that's a relevant asset. We believe these assets give a good indication of how well Stellar is connecting global financial systems. So from January to December, the total number of these assets grew by 63%. We started the year with 49 relevant assets and ended with 80. Now, each of those new assets, that represents a new connection to existing financial rails. That's how we're lighting up the map. But then if you look at the graph on the right, and this number is truly astounding, the on-network transaction volume of relevant assets grew from $2.5 million to $48.7 million by year's end. That's a 1,819% increase, So while you absorb that fact, I'm going to share a little more on the technical front about what we're doing to help ensure that Stellar is optimized to support all this growth. In Q4, SDF released a new version of Stellar Core that supports Protocol 15, and shortly thereafter, the public network validators voted to accept the new version and to upgrade the network. Remember, upgrading the network, validators decide to do that. Now, that protocol release included a few new functionalities that make it easier than ever to build user-friendly apps and services on the network. Specifically, 2 new Protocol 15 features, claimable balances and sponsored reserves, enable issuers to offer seamless on-ramps and apps to safely cover users' Lumen reserves. Combined, they simplify Stellar onboarding and account management and empower developers and businesses to create intuitive experiences that appeal to users far beyond the crypto savvy. We also worked a lot on Horizon, which is Stellar's API that developers use to access and interact with the network. In Q4, we released new Horizon API docs, which make it easier to understand and leverage Horizon's capabilities. Captive Core Beta, a new feature that simplifies Horizon deployment. It improves robustness and greatly reduces the time required to spin up a Horizon instance. And that release incidentally puts us inches away from a production-ready Horizon 2.0, which is something we'll be talking about a lot in 2021. And we released Project Hubble 2.0, which is an ETL pipeline that leverages Horizon's new ingestion system and enables the public BigQuery dataset to be updated every 5 minutes. That opens up a whole new world for data analytics on Stellar. On top of all that, we've also developed some cool new tools and products that really help make Stellar easier to use. The first of these is Freighter. It's kind of like a MetaMask for Stellar. It's a browser extension that makes it easier to sign Stellar transactions in web applications, and that makes key management simpler and more secure. We also released an all-new account viewer, which is Stellar's basic fundamental user wallet. And it features increased security and better interoperability with hardware wallets and with browser extensions like Freighter and Albedo, which is an ecosystem project that also improves key management and transaction signing. So a lot of progress, a more robust and usable Stellar, and a lot to look forward to in 2021. The network and the ecosystem are alive and kicking, and we're very eager to see what happens next. So at this point, it's time to find out about the key developments that are making Stellar the blockchain people know and trust. And Candace Kelly, SDF's General Counsel, is going to walk you through those. So I will yield the floor to her. Over to you, Candace.
Thank you so much, Justin. It's great to be here and to be able to talk about this pillar, which is being the blockchain people know and trust, which is about making the Stellar story known, bringing awareness to Stellar as a trusted, secure, stable, consistent, predictable, and extensible network. That means 3 main things: supporting the other participants in the ecosystem by making Stellar known to all audiences, developers, businesses, regulators, policymakers, and consumers. Marketing Stellar and the use cases building on Stellar, and working with governments to create awareness and education about Stellar. In Q4, SDF hosted its largest event of the year, the 2nd annual conference called Meridian. This year, it was a virtual event, and it was themed Global Connections to Solve Real-World Challenges. This event helped bring us together in an otherwise tumultuous year globally. The conversations we had touched on so many diverse ideas and perspectives, and it reminded us all how invaluable it is to reach across borders and connect with one another. We were able to dive into subjects like CBDCs, cross-border payments and remittances, the future of regulation, and many other topics featured in 45 live stream sessions with 95 speakers and 32 networking sessions and roundtable discussions. The event brought together a global audience with 2,130 registrants from 87 countries. So for those of you who missed out on Meridian, the content is all available at meridian.stellar.org, so you can check it out. The event was a perfect opportunity to hear from businesses building on Stellar and promote compelling use cases like the Cowrie Tempo Corridor. SDF's marketing team was proud to launch a new case study video and landing page highlighting the Nigeria-Europe corridor operated by Stellar-based businesses Cowrie Integrated Systems and Tempo France. In addition to the content living on the landing page, it's also being leveraged in paid media, advertising opportunities, and social media. The team plans to build on this success and create and distribute more of this type of content in 2021. We also highlighted the Cowrie Tempo use case in the World Economic Forum's first publication of the Global Future Council on Cryptocurrencies. SDF submitted 3 use cases from the Stellar ecosystem, and WEF chose Cowrie Integrated Systems to include in that publication. On the policy front, as many of you are aware, policymakers were busily working on blockchain and crypto in Q4, and we were busy making sure our voice was heard in response. Policymakers in the US and internationally focused more intently on two issues of importance to the Stellar ecosystem: the regulation of stablecoins and tightening AML CFT regulations for digital assets. On the Stable Act here in the US, legislators in the House of Representatives proposed a stablecoin regulation. And we put out a statement making it clear that innovative technology like blockchain needs new regulatory frameworks rather than trying to squeeze us into outdated models. And the Stable Act would do exactly that. It would apply outdated traditional frameworks that haven't been updated in decades to new payment infrastructure and innovations. This type of legislation would put the power back in the hands of the banks rather than the people. So it's a topic that we intend to stay actively engaged in as the Stable Act progresses through the US Congress. And on the FinCEN proposed rule for digital transactions, the SDF policy team put together a comment letter to voice our strong objections to the rule and its departure from procedural precedent. We engaged policymakers, including FinCEN, the administration, House Financial Services Committee, and the Senate Banking Committee. And we coordinated closely with the Blockchain Association and the Chamber of Digital Commerce in these efforts. We're very happy to see that FinCEN ultimately extended the comment period, which we see as a victory for our industry in making sure that these kinds of proposals have greater public-private partnership. So we'll be doing a lot more of this type of work in the year ahead. And with that, I will hand it back over to Danelle to talk more about our 2021 strategy.
Awesome, Candace. Thank you to both Justin and Candace. I love to see all the work that we're doing there. Before we open up to question and answers, I wanted to come back to our strategic pillars because apparently those are the things that I love to talk about. We've clearly shared how impactful they've been in driving our success for SDF and in turn for supporting the growth for the Stellar network and the Stellar ecosystem. So as we look to 2021, our three strategic pillars will, not surprisingly, continue to be our North Star. And we've got some concrete goals on what we want to do for each of these. We're also going to have, I'm going to talk a little bit about those now, but we're also going to publish this so that you guys can follow along with us on a quarterly basis to look at our annual goals to see how we're lining up to those with respect to our roadmap for 2021. I think that that's coming out next week. So first, to ensure the robustness and usability of Stellar, we want to support the top use cases that are being built on Stellar by categorizing and responding to their technical requirements through network proposals, any necessary changes to Horizon, all with a keen focus on supporting easy integration with the network. We have already seen some of this work in Protocol 15 with claimable balances and sponsored reserves, two things that Justin just talked about. And that work was initiated because of the needs of the ecosystem, and specifically the needs in the use cases that are already part of Stellar. So we will continue to consider those needs as we work with other participants in the ecosystem and as more and more of these use cases are developed. Next, improve liquidity on the Stellar decentralized exchange, so the DEX. DEX liquidity is important. It's the one constant that I hear from you, and frankly, that I've heard since I've started. And I want you to know that we're listening. We believe that the Stellar DEX is such an important part of what Stellar has to offer, and we need to focus on how we can collectively make it even more user-friendly. We already have several proposals from the ecosystem on how and whether to integrate smart contracts and on how and whether to integrate automated market makers. And we want to explore these options and consider whether other changes should be proposed. Importantly, it's one of our top priorities for 2021. We also want to set Stellar up for success and growth by guaranteeing that Stellar can scale to handle increasing volume from use cases and develop the SideNet or the private ledger. Haven't really named it yet, but this is a culmination of several projects that we've been working on with the community historically. So we're going to bring this together as a layer 2 technology in preparation for other integrations and new use cases in 2022. So expect to see some more on that this year. And then to be the blockchain people know and trust. This is such an important pillar, and it's important because it actually highlights the need to provide education and also to provide trust in a world where you can actually audit and determine what we're doing because we're open, but really focusing on what blockchain can bring to humanity and to the financial technologies that exist out there. So we plan to continue our work as an advocate. We keep hearing that in the US, we're going to see companies flee this market because of an unstable landscape. I don't know whether this is actually happening, but importantly, we would like to see the US, just like the larger global policy, create stability and foster growth in blockchain. And we're going to use our tools to advocate for legislation that helps eliminate that urgency that we hear. This will also help us to get Stellar itself to become more broadly known in US policy. This doesn't mean that we aren't focused elsewhere, because we are, but we would just like to also support policy needs in our own backyard. We will also continue to bring additional participants to the Stellar Network through the Enterprise Fund, as we think it helps to grow the ecosystem. And we will develop relationships with consulting firms that advise governments and financial institutions about blockchain, so that we can help make it easier for those firms to support network and network integration with Stellar. And finally, to foster sustainable use cases. We're going to continue to work to develop Vibrant, increasing the user base and adding at least one new market and one new feature by the end of 2021. And as Justin mentioned, the growth of relevant assets has already been so great, but we would love to support even more growth. So we'll continue to support the development of the Anchor network to grow relevant asset transactions on Stellar. We would like to see 5x growth of this relevant asset transactions and at least 4 additional corridors active and strong by the end of 2021. So this means we need to grow Stellar, but mostly we need to grow our Anchor network. We are going to try to do our part as the ecosystem participant to help make this happen. We're going to be putting these goals on the roadmap page on the website. In addition to these calls this year, you'll be able to see our progress on all of these projects via stellar.org. So 2020 was a year unlike any other. I've said that so many times, but despite the circumstances, we all collectively closed out 2020 with a stronger, more active network, an ecosystem, and firmly positioned to drive growth in 2021. I am beyond optimistic about what this year holds for us. And with that, we're going to open it up to questions.
Thank you, Danelle and Candace and Justin. So it's time for questions. You can submit them in the toolbar. There's a Q&A box there. We already have a few coming in that we can jump into right off the bat. And one of them pertains to relevant assets specifically. So Danelle, Justin, maybe this is for you. One is, what do we consider relevant assets? Does Bitcoin, for example, count as a relevant asset? And then also, who else do we see as driving this relevant asset growth? Are there any specific examples you could provide?
Well, Bitcoin is considered a relevant asset. Justin, I think that you actually can talk a little bit about this definition. Was one that we created in, I believe it was the end of 2019. So it is something that we've been watching throughout the whole of 2020 and really focusing on how those relevant assets have grown and have changed throughout the year. And we do try to smooth it out. So in terms of the definition, Justin already explained that it's a tethered asset, an asset that's tethered to a financial instrument. So we look at any of those assets on the net on Stellar and how those transactions are moving. But Justin, do you have any specifics about the corridors that we see or the ones that are driving the growth?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that there are actually several corridors driving the growth in relevant asset transaction volume. And a lot of it does have to do with the increased footprint of the Anchor network, right? The more endpoints there are, the more of sort of a network effect that we have, and the more transactions we have that rely on these assets that we deem or that we define as relevant assets. One of the biggest current examples of an important corridor is between Europe and Nigeria. Tempo, which is a company in Europe, and Cowrie, which is a company in Nigeria. They've created a corridor for cross-border payments, both remittances and business-to-business payments. And so they're transacting a lot using their two assets, the Euro asset issued by Tempo and the NGN, the Nigerian Naira asset issued by Cowrie. And if you want to find out more about that particular corridor, you can check out, it's something that Candace brought up. Our marketing team has put together a pretty in-depth explanation of how that corridor works, and actually a really good video where you can actually see the faces, the people who are driving those transactions, the businesses that they're building, the people behind them. And so I'd suggest, if you want to know more about how a very important corridor works, that's driving an increase in relevant transactions, check out that calorie tempo use case video.
Thanks, Justin. Kind of maybe related to that, there's a few questions coming in about anchors specifically, and their growth, and whether there are specific target markets we're looking at in that regard.
So I think the way that you build network effects.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
we couldn't hear you for a second. We got you back.
Okay. The way that you build network effects is relying on what you have already in the ecosystem and determining what's going to help the growth of those anchors that exist in the ecosystem already. And so then you target like which corridors can you build on from there. So as I mentioned, we're focusing on for the Philippines, and we think that new development with respect to ParaHub is going to bring a lot of onto the network, a lot of transactions onto the network, a lot of volume onto the network, but also the opportunity to open up corridors between the Philippines and lots of other anchors that exist out there. So think about anchor growth as growing an anchor network so that you say, okay, Cowrie, is there another corridor that actually makes a lot of sense for you to start focusing on? So the maybe Nigeria US corridor, well, we actually have USDC coming out this quarter. So that's going to be a nice corridor for them to be able to open up to. We already have another USD anchor on the network, but this is a different anchor that they can provide different opportunities through. So, and then also same thing, we have a lot of anchors in Latin America. So in terms of our Argentinian anchors or the Mexican peso anchors, like how can we drive volume and what corridors make sense for them? So you have to think in terms of network effects. So there's no particular region that we're focused on. What we are trying to do is look at the existing landscape, not just bring other anchors to the network to support that landscape, but bring additional application layers that are going to bring volume to those anchors so that they actually can have a lot more to do with those assets. So that's the way we think about the growth of the network. We think very systematically about talking to each of the network participants and where would they like to see that growth happen. So you're going to see in this quarter, we actually have a goal that we're going to grow the anchor network by 4 new anchors this quarter. So we'll see if we meet that goal. And so we're focused on this kind of network effects growth. So no particular region, but making sure that we're adhering to the values that each of these anchors that are already on the network want to see in terms of their own individual growth.
Awesome. The next question coming in here, I think Candace, this maybe is for you. General understanding of kind of what we anticipate the regulatory environment to be this year, and maybe particularly with the new US administration coming in.
Sure. So lots of changes in the Capitol here in the United States, both the administration and the makeup of Congress. And so we definitely think that there will be some shifts in terms of the focus on regulation. And our main focus will be on getting in early and often to speak with folks on the Hill, particularly the new members of Congress, the new leadership on the key committees that affect our industry. And to be clear, that's something that we have been doing right along. We have one dedicated policy and government relations person on our team who spends most of his time in Washington, D.C., where despite the pandemic, there were opportunities to meet even in person with folks on the Hill, which he does on a regular basis, and works very closely with the Blockchain Association and the Chamber of Digital Commerce to make sure that we're not simply sitting back and lobbing in comment letters, but we're really engaging. And I think that the key is going to be making sure that the folks who are really in decision-making places at this point have a good education and understanding. We've seen a few things coming out of just sort of sound bites about people's initial reactions or views of blockchain or cryptocurrency very broadly. So making sure we can get in front of folks and educate them. That's the most important thing, is both educating on the promise of blockchain technology and how it can be used in a safe and compliant manner, and being advocates for that. So we definitely plan to be very active, whether it's virtually on Zoom calls like this or in person when that's allowed in DC, both with the administration and with the new leadership in Congress.
Awesome. Yeah, let's hope that sometime soon we'll all be in person together. Next question. A few people are coming asking for an update on USDC, obviously the much anticipated Stellar USDC. Danelle, do you have an update on that?
Well, we're still on track for this quarter. I am the USDC, the Circle team is remarkable in terms of what their focus has been and on how driven they've been to make this happen. And I love working with Jeremy. I think he's a phenomenal leader of that organization, and we're just really excited to be able to bring this to the network. We're close, and I can't give you the details on the date, but we're very close, and it's something that we look forward to have happening because we think it's going to just drive a lot of opportunity for the existing anchors that we have on the network, and then applications and wallets and their ability to be able to integrate with Circle's APIs. So I am super excited about this and what this is going to bring for the network.
We're close. It's exciting. Another kind of update question is about Vibrant. What, you mentioned it in your last kind of what we're looking at for 2021. Any other update there on what we can expect? Yeah,
so Vibrant it's been such a great exploration for us. Vibrant has actually helped us to fine tune the better ways to integrate with the network. So we've learned a lot from building Vibrant, and that was basically the intention. The intention was we want this wallet to be amazing. We want this product to be out there and deliver tons of value, first to Argentinians, but then also to other regions. So we want it to be uber successful. But really, it was this focus of ours to really learn about what integrating with the network at that level was like and how we can improve it from documentation, from steps, from how we can think about network integration. And so really, it's actually, we've learned so much from that. And a lot of what you see in terms of our changes and the ecosystem proposals, and also just working with the different steps that exist in the documentation comes from that work that we've done with Vibrant. So we have Vibrant users. We actually get a lot of feedback from them. We're still working, and there's updates that are happening all the time with respect to the application itself. The team is working very, very hard at what we're calling like our big launch, which would be, we're targeting for Q2, the beginning of Q2. So I think that this is going to be exciting. And I think that, what we've learned with Vibrant has made the network better and has made integrating with the network easier. And that's part of what we're supposed to be doing here at SDF. So I feel like it's kind of a win-win. The application itself is a tool that's really, really useful for the ecosystem and for the current users. We have a growing ecosystem around just Vibrant. So it's really been fun to see. And we're hoping that also pushes through the network effects as well.
Great. And maybe one more update question for you here, Danelle, is Abra. People are wondering what's happening with Abra. We invested, they were part of our enterprise investment fund last year. So what's happening there?
Yeah, so I should start by saying that the foundational basis for us to invest in companies is the way that I think about it. There are two guardrails that we need to think through. The first is that it has to bring value to Stellar as the network. And also the second that is that it has to actually build on the ecosystem. So it has to improve what's out there in the ecosystem and allow for those network effects. So those are the two sort of guardrails that we enter into with every investment that we do. And so the question that you guys have is what's going on with Abra, because it's Abra actually done the integrations with Stellar. And so I can't actually tell you their roadmap, although I know their roadmap because I spend a lot of time with Bill and the team at Abra to understand what they're doing. But their roadmap does include integration with the network, but I can't tell you when because Bill is very keen on, they do not talk about their products before they launch. And so we'll wait for them to be able to share that with you. But I still am deeply, I believe that Abra is still within the guardrails of the investment. And that's what I think that you probably want to hear. You want to hear that they're still on track to be able to come to Stellar and to make Stellar even better than it is, and they are.
Great. This next question here is for Justin. We had 2 protocol upgrades this year. Protocol 16 would be next. What can we expect there?
One of my favorite things about the way that the Stellar protocol evolves is that so much happens in public. And so the great answer that I can give you to that question is also, I can sort of tell you how to always know what's going on with the protocol. The first thing that you can do is watch the open protocol discussions. And the second thing that you can do is go to the GitHub repo where all of the core advancement proposals, which are basically proposed changes to the protocol, are discussed. They're proposed and then discussed, and they're discussed on an email thread, a Stellar Dev Google group. So if you join those places, you'll always sort of be able to see what's going on with ideas about new proposed changes to the protocol, and you can participate. Like, you can share your ideas, you can get in there and help come up with better ways to implement things or make suggestions of your own. So that's sort of how you can always know what's on deck for the protocol. For Protocol 16, we just had the first open protocol discussion last Thursday. And you can actually go watch it right now. You can go to stellar.org/events and you can find the last open protocol discussion. And you'll see that in that discussion, we basically talked about two core advancement proposals, both of which would help to bring regulated assets to Stellar. They would make it easier to issue assets that have certain flags set, if you choose to, in order to comply with the regulations required for certain types of assets. Now, those proposals, they wouldn't affect other assets that already exist on the network. They wouldn't, but it would empower a new kind of developer and a new kind of product to be built on Stellar. So I would say the CAP 35 and CAP 29, both of which introduce new flags for regulated assets, are currently what's being discussed for Protocol 16. So go check those out.
Thanks, Justin. One theme that is coming up in quite a few questions, so we're going to try to package them together, which is the hot topic of CBDCs and what we're doing on that front. So Danelle, can you share more about how we're thinking about working with folks on that type of technology?
Sure, yeah, I'll do that. But first, I just want to say I love that we had the open protocol meeting last week, and thank you, Justin, for organizing the team on that. This is exactly the way that an open source project should work. So I'm really excited that we're doing these things and we're really focusing on the ecosystem and building that ecosystem and bringing other participants in. On the CBDC front, this is an important space for us to be able to be available to governments. And in terms of a strategy, I will tell you what our strategy is. Our strategy is that any government that we can talk to about blockchain and the value of blockchain is a government that we want to engage with. So this is an education piece as much as it is a strategy discussion. I don't know that all governments are moving towards the desire to issue the CBDCs, but the important thing is that as long as they understand the value of blockchain, it may encourage them to do so. It may encourage them to leverage the assets that exist on the network themselves, or to distribute their CBDCs through private institutions that are already building on the network. The one thing I want to say is that from I would love to be able to have this private and this public partnership with governments all over the world so that we can talk to those governments about what their desires are concerning blockchain, what their fears are about blockchain, and then think about the CBDC question and ask them like what they want to get from the issuance of a CBDC and how they could partner with those institutions that are already live on the network to be able to make that happen. So the strategy is to leverage the network as it exists today and to bring in more anchors that can support these kinds of CBDCs that may be able to be distributed through them, and also work with governments to educate them about the value of blockchain, what's going to happen if they miss out on blockchain, and what an issuing a CBDC could do for them. So these are just conversations that we have, and the biggest part of the strategy is to be available and to put ourselves out there as much as we can to be able to have those conversations. So that's the way that I would talk about our CBDC strategy, is to be open to them and also to be fluid in terms of how the network can be able to be available and leveraged to help them.
Okay, we have time for probably squeeze in two more questions here, and there are a few, again, a few questions coming in on the themes. Danelle, do we expect to be announcing either any new partnerships or new investments from the Enterprise Fund this quarter or soon this year? What's happening on that front?
Well, if we're going to follow on with what we have promised ourselves that we're going to do for this quarter, the answer is yes to both. So we have a few Enterprise Fund investments that are already sort of in the pipeline. Look in the next few weeks for us to be able to make those announcements. And then with anchors and partnerships with respect to anchors as well as application layers, it's part of what's our ethos is to be constantly focused on making this network more robust and the ecosystem more complete. And so that's our job, and that's what we're focused on doing to support this and grow it. So yes, we'll have more of those to come this quarter as well.
Awesome.
But I can't say what.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say,
tuned.
as the head of communications, you have to be patient, folks, because we don't want to scoop ourselves. We're going to share it soon. So last question here is, obviously it's hard to expect exactly what this year is going to be like, Danelle, but can you share kind of how we're thinking about, still in the context of the pandemic? Are we going to keep our work virtual? Are we going to move towards, in person? Could we think that Meridian this year would maybe have in-person components? How are you thinking about, our work on that type of thing this year? Will these seminars still always be virtual, I guess?
I think, I don't know the answer to whether these seminars will always be virtual. It would be really fun for us to be in person. Well, I would actually, at the very least, like to be in person with the group that are presenting to you, because it'd be more fun for us and probably more fun for you to have that. We have to respect what's going on in the world, and we have to understand that the world isn't sort of ready for that for that in-person time together yet. But we are going to continue to engage as much as we can as an open source project with you as our ecosystem in a virtual way until we can actually be in person. The way that we had actually talked about Meridian last year is that we originally had thought about Meridian obviously being in person. And what we did in the end is we planned for the virtual, but we also hoped that maybe we could shift to a little bit of it being in person and having many geographies available for meetups for people to be able to attend, even if some of it was by video for Meridian that way. So maybe that's how we'll think about Meridian for this year as well. Until we have clear indications that in-person is something for us to be able to do, we'll plan for a virtual Meridian with these in-person components to the extent that we can actually do that. We want to be together because we think that that helps to grow and solidify the ecosystem, but we also need to be respectful of what's happening in the world. So I can't wait for the day when we can all get together again. Even our own office. I can't wait for the day when we can all go to our office again. Actually, the office we haven't been to for almost a year now. And that it's just a crazy idea that it's just, not that far away, but we can't actually get into it for obvious reasons. So we hope for that.
Thank you. Okay, that is all we really have time for today. So Danelle, Justin, Candace, thank you so much for taking the time. We'll see you guys next quarter. And
thank you. Super happy to be here. Thanks everyone for participating with us.
And just a reminder to everyone on the call, as soon as this call ends, you will get a pop-up that will prompt you for a post-event survey. And if you fill it out, you have the chance to, the first few hundred respondents have the chance to win a swag box. So that will again pop up at the end of this survey, at the end of this call. So thank you so much again for joining, and we'll see you next time.